and welcome back to my channel. I'm going to jump right into today's video because it is going to be a bit lengthy. I recently finally got a chance to watch Hereditary, which when it came out everybody was talking about it, and most people were saying it was either the scariest thing that they'd ever seen, or it was the best horror movie of the year, or best horror movie they'd seen in years. And those are some bold statements, and being that horror is the love of my life, I was immediately going, okay, either this is going to be really good or this is going to turn out like how I felt with Don't Breathe. So I finally got a chance to watch it, and then after I watched it, I had so many thoughts and feelings about it. I was just sitting there having a conversation with myself going, and I really like how they did this, and I really like how they did this, and I like how they did that because that means that, and then that means that, and then I like how they did it, and then eventually I just kind of look like one of the characters in the movie. So I couldn't figure out, how do I put all this that's coming out here into the form of a review. I couldn't figure out how to do that because reviews have to have some type of structure, and so I decided, screw that, I'm going to do an analysis of the movie instead, because that basically means that I can talk about a lot more things that happen in the film in depth, and I can still add in some reviewing 2 cents on my thoughts and feelings on certain aspects in it. So that is what I'm doing today. I'm doing an analysis of Hereditary. So if you don't already know, Hereditary is a 2018 American horror film written and directed by Ari Aster in his feature directorial debut, and it follows a family haunted after the death of their secretive grandmother. First off, the movie is brilliant. I am not a big fan of A24, A24, whatever you want to call it, films. I haven't seen many, but of what I have seen, I haven't liked many of them. I hated The Witch. I hated It Comes at Night. I didn't enjoy The Black Coat's Daughter. Also didn't help that Emma Roberts was in that movie. Green Room was okay, but I didn't enjoy it all that much. Tusk was interesting, but I didn't like it. A24 for the most part just hasn't been my cup of tea, though there are some movies from them I still plan to see, but Hereditary is the first one I have really enjoyed. I love how well structured, written, and filmed this movie is. I don't agree with calling it the scariest movie of the year or this year's The Exorcist. I don't think Hereditary made people throw up, and aside from the subject of possession, they don't have anything in common. And they are scary in very different ways that are subjective. For me, what makes a movie scary is a film that triggers my fight or flight response enough to the point where I become paranoid at every noise and start thinking things are there that aren't there, and that isn't how this movie made me feel. It certainly has moments that made me jump or made my heart rate increase, but what's interesting is that I don't feel those moments were designed to scare the audience. I feel they were intended to scare the characters, and at that they were successful. Such moments as characters feeling very vulnerable, seeing things in the shadows that are there but aren't there, and then them turning out to be their mind playing tricks on them. They were experiencing what we experience when we are scared shitless. If you're scared and in the dark, if you look at something long enough, it begins to appear as more than what it is, and it's unsettling and scary because you start questioning, am I crazy, or is that really happening? And that was a huge theme through the movie. What I love most about this movie, and what I think it has done so brilliantly, is to design itself as 2 halves of one coin. On one side, you have the subject of grief and mental health and the severe impact those things can have not only on you, but how they ripple out and affect those around you. Mental health issues become like an infestation. First it manifests, and then it spreads, and it just infects everyone and everything around you. It breaks you down, it breaks down those around you, and no matter what you do, there just doesn't seem to be a way out. And I can speak from personal experience on that. Then on the other side, we have the paranormal and the subject of demonic possession, which is the exact same thing. So these 2 subjects are depicted in the exact same way. as mirrors of each other, allowing them to work off each other spectacularly. If you were to take out the mental health issues, you still have a strong and compelling story about the supernatural, and if you take out the supernatural, you still have a strong and compelling story about mental health. Another thing I find so brilliant, when you look at the 4 stages of demonic possession, it's funny because even The Conjuring brought this up, but bear with me. The 4 stages of demonic possession are infestation, oppression, obsession, and possession. Each of these stages are depicted perfectly throughout this film, and the beauty of it is they work to portray both subject matters. First, we have stage 1. Infestation. This is how it starts, seeing, hearing, or smelling things that aren't normal. In the topic of the supernatural, it's seeing objects move or hearing a disembodied sound, something to indicate you're not alone. If you look at this through the guise of mental health, then what it is seeing and hearing things that aren't there, but they are there in your mind. We witness this stage in the movie, whether it be Charlie or Peter seeing a strange flash, Peter or Annie hearing that tongue popping from a dead Charlie, things like that. Then we have stage 2, oppression. This is when activity kicks up a notch and becomes more physical, to threatening nightmares, getting sick, suffering from extreme depression or anxiety, relationships beginning to fall apart, and not in a normal way. It's more a bombardment of these things. Again, we see this stage in the movie. Annie having nightmares of her son being dead and finding herself in his room. Peter having nightmares of being attacked. Peter suffering from severe panic attacks. Annie suffering from severe depression. Even the relationship among each member of the family has become severely fractured. So we have stage 2 of demonic possession perfectly depicted, but again, it echoes the subject of mental health and the fractures that can form when dealing with grief. Next is stage 3, obsession. This stage is pretty self-explanatory. It's when the victim or victims become obsessed with the occurrences in the house to the point where they can't function as a sane or rational person. This can also result in insomnia and suicidal thoughts because it takes over your life and your every thought. You see where I'm going with this? Annie becomes obsessed with the loss of her daughter and contacting her and the occurrences that have begun to happen as a result. She's not sleeping and she is unable to function to the point where she does appear insane and even destroys all her work. Peter is also affected too. He's not sleeping very well and he is unable to focus in school and just appears as though he is slipping into madness. Here we have stage 3 perfectly represented and once again showing us the impact and severity of mental health. Finally is stage 4, possession. It's a complicated stage. For one, you can't have stage 4 without stages 1 to 3 first, because what they do is act as ways to break down a person physically, mentally, and emotionally. It makes them vulnerable and receptible to a demonic spirit taking control of their body for their own gain. The host is still very much alive. In the case of this film, all this is happening to break down Peter so that he can be the host for a demon, but the demon wants that body for himself. Peter is broken past the point of no return to the point he jumps out a window, which then makes his body vacant so the demon can take control. But we also see that Annie is possessed and is forced to commit suicide. This is not her action, but her body and mind have been broken so much that she was also receptible, and this entity was then able to control her and make her commit these acts. Does this fit with mental health as well? Yes, plenty of people have gone through the journey of mental health and it has broken them down to the point of doing things that have resulted in death or near death, and it's not always because they were trying to kill themselves, it was because they were trying to escape something they couldn't escape. Some of course do kill themselves just to make it stop, and some even hurt others. It's a complete loss of control and function, and you are no longer behind the driver's seat. It is your mind, but your mind is so corrupted that it's not you making those decisions. So what we have seen is this film show us each stage as it leads up to its finale, and it does so seamlessly, and then brilliantly has them echo the progression of mental health issues and the deterioration that occurs as the condition worsens. For me, this movie is like if Donnie Darko and Paranormal Activity had a baby, but that baby grew up to be Angelina Jolie. you know, pretty, smart, successful. Hereditary has a great deal in common with Paranormal Activity. We have a demonic infestation, possession, we have a crazy cult trying to produce a child for a demon to possess. Very much the same, only one is great and the other is shit. Hereditary is everything Paranormal Activity wishes it was. Even the name is brilliant and also reflects both subjects. Mental health can be hereditary, and so is this demonic situation in the movie. There is something in this bloodline that makes them the perfect host for this demon called Paimon, one of the 8 kings of hell, who is actually a real-life entity. Well, real in a sense you can read about him in books on the occult, but that of course opens the topic to do you believe in the paranormal, and we're not going into that, so we'll say he is based on a real life mythical entity which people have been known to worship throughout history. So in this movie we have Ellen, the grandma who died. She is the queen of the coven or cult who worship this demon and are trying to summon him so he will bestow on them success and fortune. It's safe to say she has only had children to achieve this end. Annie tells us that her brother had schizophrenia and committed suicide because he believed their mother was trying to put people into him. Given we now know what Granny was up to, that probably wasn't a mental health issue speaking. She was trying to make her son the host for this demon because he prefers to inhabit men, and he didn't want that, so he killed himself, which left her without a body for this demon. Annie's dad died of starvation as a result of psychotic depression, or so we're told. Given we now know Ellen was a demon-loving, murdering nutjob, I theorize she probably hooked up with him to get pregnant. She could have driven him crazy. Hell, she could have had sex with him in some weird fertility ritual. Maybe he was driven mad and died, or perhaps he was killed when he was no longer of use. Ellen got 2 children, a son as a possible host and a daughter who could bear more children, so the timing of his death seems to make me think he died when he was no longer useful, but this aspect is just me speculating. Annie says she never wanted her son, that she tried to cause a miscarriage, but her mother forced her to have the child, obviously because she wanted a boy to be born. But when he was, Annie feared her mother's behavior and kept him away from her, meaning she wasn't able to perform the necessary rituals on him, probably. Out of maybe desperation, she got the chance to do it with Annie's daughter Charlie, which involved even breastfeeding her. I'm sure there is a reason behind that, speculate all you like. So what we know by the end is that Charlie was never technically born Charlie. Charlie was born as Paimon, which is why the grandmother worshipped and adored her granddaughter. It's because she knew she was the current host for this demon. A couple clues that tell us this is how one of the guests at the funeral smiles at Charlie. It's with pure adoration, like he knows who she is. Also, Charlie seems very interested in her grandmother's pendant, which is Paimon's symbol. And also closer to the end of the movie, when Annie is going through her mother's box of belongings looking for her books, she pulls out this quilted front doorstep cover thing. She pulls out hers and her daughter's, and on her daughter's, the Paimon symbol is embroidered into it on either side of her name, hint hint. So the ultimate goal was to get Paimon into a male body, which is Peter, because it has to be someone of Ellen's bloodline, which is why in all this Steve is always the level-headed one and somewhat unaffected by what is going on because he is not of that bloodline. Charlie was never normal. We can see that from the jump, and there is a reason for that. I believe it's why at the end they call the entity inside Peter both Charlie and Paimon, because they are one in the same. The director said that the film is meant to look like it is Annie behind these events, when in fact it is this coven pulling their strings. I never saw Annie as the mastermind. She always appeared as the victim to me, probably because I know what being manipulated looks and feels like. She always looked to me as someone being manipulated. It even goes back to the start of the film, where I believe we were given what I feel is the most subtle and best foreshadowing in the entire movie and of any movie in a long while. These days, foreshadowing is more obvious than someone wearing red at an all-white party, but this was both essential and subtle, and it didn't even occur to me until the end of the movie. At the start of the film, Peter is in class, and the class is discussing the character of Heracles, a hero in Greek mythology, the son of Zeus and Alcmene. He is better known to the world by his Roman name, Hercules. So weird that the Disney movie was about the Greeks and yet they used his Roman name. Weird. Anyway, they're talking about one of Sophocles' plays, and I think they might be talking about Women of Trachis, because that piece of work features Heracles and his death being a product of a prophecy that he couldn't control that stated he would die by the hands of someone who was already dead. Something that kind of happens in this film if you think about it. Everyone dies as a result of what the grandma had done, and it's all happening while she's dead. So the teacher says, Heracles never had any choice, so does that make it more tragic or less tragic than if he has a choice? A student goes on to elaborate on her answer of how it would be worse to have no choice because they're just puppets in a machine, and I realize this perfectly sets up the events of the film, because the film shows us and tells us that from start to finish, these characters are being worked like puppets on a string. They are under the illusion that they are in control of their actions and their outcomes, but fact is they aren't, and they never were. Every moment of this story has been mapped out for them with no chance of their survival. For starters, Charlie was always going to die. The how could have changed, but it was inevitable. Charlie was Paimon. Paimon wanted a male host. They were going to make sure he got it, which means Charlie's body had to go. We saw the symbol of the coven of Paimon on the pole that decapitated her. That was no accident, it was intentional. Given how manipulated Annie was throughout the film, she very well could have been manipulated into suggesting Charlie go with Peter to that party to ensure her death. There was nothing on the road on the way to the party, but now suddenly on the way back, something is in the road at the very spot to cause their accident. The car could have flipped, crashed into the pole, anything, but either way, it would have resulted in Charlie's death. It just ended up being a really shocking and impactful scene. Annie was always going to end up saying that incantation that would lead to Paimon possessing Peter. That coven had plans A through to Z planned out to ensure that would happen. We saw it early in the movie when a mysterious person puts a pamphlet for a seance on top of their mail. The family dismissed it, so they moved on to plan B. And if plan B hadn't worked, if Joan hadn't been able to get Annie to come to her house and give her that ritual, it wouldn't have mattered. They would have moved on to plan C. Either way, they would have gotten her to perform that spell. She never had a choice. She was never in control of the events around her. This coven was watching them and pulling their strings the entire time. Even the filming style illustrates this. The way some shots focus on Annie's miniature sculptures and zooms in to become their real-life counterparts, it gives that feeling that they're just dolls in a house and someone else is in control, and we are just watching how it plays out. There are plenty of scenes where we see or are given the impression that people are watching from the outside. They are being monitored like crazy, and they're completely unaware. So again, it goes back to that question of which is worse. Is it worse that they have no choice, or would it be worse if they did? And then on top of that, it once again comes around to reflecting mental health. Because if you are affected by mental health, you don't have a choice and you don't have control. And sometimes you're aware of it and sometimes you're not. It just shows how incredible and meticulous the writing of this movie is. Everything is so incredibly well balanced and connected, it's redonkulous. We are, of course, given subtle clues and hints as to what is going on throughout this movie and where it is going. So if you're not good with subtlety or puzzles, then you probably won't pick up on all of them, some of which I've already mentioned. Things such as words that are found written on the walls in the home during the course of the movie. The first one we see is satony, which is a word associated with necromancy, which is a practice used for communicating with the dead. This word happens to appear not only after Grandma dies, but the night before Steve is informed that Ellen's grave has been desecrated and her body removed. Annie also happens to see this word right before she sees an apparition of her mother. So the word happens to coincide with what's going on. And since it turns out Grandma is rotting in the attic for the purpose of a spell, clearly the two are connected. And it acts as another clue. Next word found is Zazas, which would coincide with a mantra used to invoke a demon that lines up more with the events of the movie. Some speculate it's associated with a demon that people have reported coming into contact with when using a spirit board. The name sometimes is Zaza or Zozo. Some people even believe that Zaza is the spirit of Lola Zaza, who was the daughter of Aleister Crowley. And no, I'm not talking about the King of Hell from Supernatural. I'm talking about a real person from a century ago who practiced dark magic. But that demon has always been believed to be female, and Paimon in this movie is not. So I'm not sure which explanation behind the name is the right one, but the notion of it supporting the summoning of a demon also works. Next we have Liftouch Pandemonium. So Liftouch is Hebrew for open, and pandemonium can mean chaos. It can refer to a place or a spell to invoke demons. Chaos is sometimes even associated with demons as a name for them, so you could technically translate to the family or Peter being open for possession. Either way, these random words aren't random and do correlate with specific moments in the movie itself. I've raved about the script work, which is without a doubt some of the best script work I've come across in a very long time. On top of that, the cinematography is equally perfect. The camera did a lot of work. Visually, the movie looks quite cold and lifeless, almost solitary, which I feel are words you could associate with depression. It's filmed with dark themes, and in turn it had dark visual tones. There's always this clever use of lighting and camera angles to make things in your peripheral vision look like, am I seeing that, or is that a trick of the light? Which again is what these characters are experiencing. From Annie seeing her mother in the dark and then she's gone when the light turns on. Even for a brief moment I had to go, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? And the longer I was allowed to focus on it, the more I was certain it was there. Or towards the end when Peter wakes up and there's a possessed Annie on the ceiling just watching him. The way the camera never focuses on her means, depending on your eyesight, you might not see her at first, but when you do, it just makes her presence all the more impactful. You don't know what will happen, you don't know if she will attack or reveal herself. It's like this sick game of paranormal cat and mouse, and those moments, I admit, had my heart pounding. I acknowledge those specific moments did scare me, but I did not find the film overall scary. But I love how the camera makes each of these moments almost seem like a trick of the light. It just intensifies things. Every actor in this movie gives such a terrific performance, and they should all be having Oscars thrown at their heads. The places they had to go, the way they were able to make these scenes feel so unsettling and traumatic just through their performances was incredible. You just can't find any fault with them. Toni Collette sold it the best. The grief, the loss, the instability, the possession, the range was just wow. I was not a fan of Millie Shapiro and the tongue popping. I will give her the fact she played a creepy 12-year-old walking around with a demon inside her incredibly well, and she was the creepiest of everyone. But the tongue popping thing was annoying as fuck. I hear ASMR artists do it in their videos and it makes me want to punch a wall. It's not relaxing, it's not scaring, it's just fucking irritating to me. But in the context of the film, I can see why it would be scary, or why some were traumatized by it, because it was used in a very clever way. Especially how it continues to be this noise tormenting Peter and driving him insane, because it continues to reinforce his feelings that his sister is coming for him for causing her death, when it is so much more than that. I never understood the head decapitating stuff, and I still don't. I don't know why this demon has a fascination with chopping off heads. First the bird, then Charlie, then Grandma's corpse, then Annie. Why is Paimon such a fan of lopping off heads? Is he friends with the Queen of Hearts or something? And it is the demon who has this fascination, because when Annie is looking through the book that shows us an illustration of King Paimon, god of mischief, it shows him on a cow or a camel, and hanging from his hip are 3 severed heads. Maybe 3 heads must be severed to conjure him. I mean, 3 were removed, so that fits. Then towards the end, we have the coven in and around the house butt naked, and I just don't get it. While the image of strangers standing in your home or around your home naked and smiling is both unsettling and terrifying as fuck, I just don't understand why that was happening. Plus, it really reminds me of Paranormal Activity 3 or 4, when they step outside the house and suddenly all these creepy looking women have appeared out of nowhere. Anyway, they're all just randomly placed and standing, though good on you for having an equal amount of naked men and women on the screen. I haven't seen so much male frontal nudity outside of Pornhub, so that's great. But I don't get it. Even if it's part of the ceremony, they were scattered around in such weird places, like one random dude downstairs, then a random woman in the attic, then suddenly 3 people in the attic. It just seemed misplaced. Creepy and effective, but misplaced or confusing to me. I think I was most disturbed when you see the image of Annie's corpse just floating up into the treehouse. I don't know why, but that was creepy as fuck. How did she even get in the attic in the first place? This movie, regardless of those little things, is truly brilliant. It's a very clever horror movie that addresses 2 subject matters in the same frame in a very impactful way. I think if you understand it, then it will speak volumes to you, but I'm sure a lot of people would walk away going, what the fuck just happened? And that happens, and that's normal. I still don't feel that I would classify this movie as scary. It's unsettling, confronting, intense as fuck, and most undoubtedly disturbing. But for me, I wouldn't classify it as a scary movie. I mean, I watched this movie at 3 a.m. in the pitch black and was still able to roll over 2 hours later and go to sleep like a baby. Make of that what you will. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I know it was lengthy, but come on, if you've seen Hereditary, then I think you can understand. It's one of those films that just kind of encourages people to have a lot of very open, in-depth talks about it, and it gives you a lot of material to think over and discuss and analyze and dissect, and it's an incredible and fascinating piece of film, and is definitely one of the better pieces of work to come out in recent years. It's not 100% a top favorite of mine for 2018, but it is definitely high up, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you go and see it. Even if you end up hating it, at least you'll be able to understand what everybody's talking about and throw in your 2 cents too. So if you have seen it and you have any thoughts about it or any thoughts on this video, then please comment down below, and until next time, bye. Yeah.